The calendar had turned to October 1944. The place was Aachen, a city destined to become the first major German metropolis to fall to the relentless Allied advance. But before the tanks could rumble through, before the infantry could clear every rubble-strewn street, the city was defined by a different kind of warfare: the cold, meticulous geometry of silence. It was here, amidst the shattered remnants of what was once a proud medieval city, that Sergeant Frank Deadeye Miller found his perch. Miller was not the blunt instrument of mass combat. He was the needlepoint, the surgical strike. His canvas was a 4-block radius, his tool a M1903A4 Springfield rifle, a weapon revered for its long, steady breath and its capacity for lethal discretion. From his hide in the fractured spire of the old rat house, Miller commanded a view of a city holding its breath. The air itself was thick with pulverized concrete, gunpowder, and the heavy metallic scent of impending defeat. Miller was, by doctrine, a tool of demoralization. His job was not to hold a line, but to shatter morale, to introduce the constant paralyzing dread that anyone stepping into the open might be instantly, anonymously erased. In the first 3 days of the siege, Miller had accounted for 7 confirmed kills: a staff car driver, a radio operator trying to string a field line, and 5 German infantrymen foolish enough to use the same exposed alleyway twice. To the Germans holding the pockets, this sniper was not a single soldier, but an omnipresent curse, an invisible wall of finality. But Miller was a human being before he was a killer, and the war in Aachen was presenting scenes that cut through the hardened shell of his professional focus. He tracked the movements of the enemy, but he also tracked the ghosts, the remaining civilians, caught in the lethal dance between American artillery and German fanaticism. And then, at 14:15 hours on a Tuesday, his scope settled on something that did not fit the cold calculation of the battlefield. Below him, in the hollowed-out square, near the remains of a bombed-out bakery, a small figure moved. A child, a girl, perhaps 8 years old, dressed in a faded, threadbare coat that seemed impossibly clean against the backdrop of absolute filth. She was hugging a small, dust-caked bundle. She wasn't running, she wasn't panicking, and she wasn't even attempting to hide from the sporadic shelling. She was simply standing, her head bowed, radiating a profound, absolute stillness. Miller had seen weeping children. He had seen terrified children. But this girl was utterly silent, her shoulders shaking with a grief so quiet, so private, that it seemed to belong to an older, world-weary soul. This silence, amplified by the heavy quiet of the battlefield's temporary lull, was a piercing anomaly. The disciplined professional, the Deadeye, felt the cold grip of the military objective begin to loosen, replaced by a deep, unwelcome wrench of pity. The historical irony here was a deep, bitter vein. The most precise instrument of American military might, the lone sniper, was now focused not on a target of opportunity, but on a vulnerable child, a child he was simultaneously defending from the violence of the war and introducing to the existential danger of his presence. His location, normally his greatest asset, was now her greatest threat. If a German soldier spotted her, she was a non-factor. If a German soldier spotted him focusing on her, she became a hostage, or worse, a perfect bait. And what they, the German command, the hardened SS units still fighting house to house, did not yet understand, was that this silent child had, in a single moment of absolute vulnerability, become an unexpected vulnerability for the deadliest American soldier in their sector. Miller adjusted his position, his breathing technique momentarily forgotten as he watched her. He had to make a choice, an instantaneous tactical and moral calculus that had nothing to do with Army field manuals. How to extract a silent, grieving target that was not a target at all. His training dictated he ignore the civilian factor and maintain position. His humanity screamed louder than any artillery shell. He decided on the impossible. He had to clear the area before she became a statistic. Over the next hour, Miller transformed his sector from a cold geometry of killing to a quiet, lethal perimeter of protection. He meticulously eliminated 2 reconnaissance patrols trying to cross the square, their movements swift and silent, their fate sealed by the unseen hand of the sniper. The Germans registered the losses, but did not connect them to the girl. Yet, Miller's heart hammered not with the thrill of the kill, but with the fear of failure. He was protecting a small island of innocence in an ocean of destruction. He had 5 hours of light left. He needed her to move, but she wouldn't. She stayed rooted, a monument to the war's invisible toll. He thought of the technical specs of his situation. The rat house was 400 meters from the square, a manageable distance for his .30 Aero 6 round. His scope was zeroed for 100 yards, a standard combat zero, meaning he had to hold over slightly, a minor adjustment for a man of his skill. But the wind, funneled by the broken streets, was a constant, shifting challenge, and every shot betrayed his position, even if delayed. He could not risk a shot to simply scare her away. It had to be a distraction that felt like a natural part of the shelling. He radioed his forward observer, a man named Henderson, using the lowest possible squelch on the primitive field radio. "Henderson, I need 1 pre-sighted mortar round, 500 yards out, far right flank of the sector. Target the abandoned warehouse, nothing close to the square. I need noise, not impact." "Negative, Deadeye. We're holding fire. The colonel wants absolute radio silence until 17 now. What's the target?" Henderson's voice was a harsh, crackling whisper. "The target is a tactical necessity. Now, Henderson, the element of surprise is evaporating." Henderson hesitated, a long, suspenseful pause, the sound of crackling static representing the weight of a court-martial. "Affirmative, Deadeye. 1 round, 500 yards, on its way. What in the hell are you doing up there?" Miller didn't answer. He laid his rifle down and pulled out his field glasses, training them on the girl. She was still silent, still weeping. But now, a new element entered the scene, emerging from the ruins of a burned-out tenement. A trio of German soldiers, their faces grim and exhausted, moving with the sluggish, overconfident gait of men who thought the area was quiet. They had not heard the muffled reports of Miller's rifle. They were moving directly toward the girl. The moment of decision had passed. Miller had not hours, but seconds. He picked up his rifle, the cold, smooth metal, a familiar weight. The 3 soldiers were now 150 meters away, well within range, but directly in the line of sight of the girl. If he fired, she would see the flash, the smoke, and the immediate violent end of the men. He wanted to save her life, not shatter her mind. Just as his finger tightened on the trigger, the air was ripped open by a distant, heavy thump, followed by a high, whistling shriek, the sound of the mortar round, traveling at over 600 feet per second, zeroing in on the warehouse exactly as Miller requested. The ensuing explosion was a controlled thunderclap, designed for noise and shockwave, not damage. It was enough. The 3 German soldiers instantly hit the deck, convinced the shelling had resumed. And the girl, after a moment of profound stasis, finally, slowly, lifted her head. The sudden noise had broken the spell of her silence. She looked around, confused. Then finally, seeing the 3 soldiers pinned to the ground, she began to move. Not toward safety, but away from the pinned Germans, directly into the open square. Miller tracked her through his scope, urging her silently to keep going. She was moving toward a bombed-out fountain, a temporary shelter, but beyond it lay a road that led to the American lines. She had perhaps 3 minutes before the Germans rose again. But just as she reached the fountain, a new, far more dangerous sound cut through the silence. The guttural roar of heavy diesel engines echoing off the narrow alleyways. And rounding the corner of the main boulevard, not 3 blocks away, came the unmistakable, terrifying convoy. Not 3 soldiers, not 7, but a column of heavy vehicles, military trucks and 2 command cars, painted in the ominous clinical field gray of the Waffen-SS. Miller counted quickly, his heart freezing in his chest. The trucks were packed shoulder to shoulder with troops. He estimated at least 50 heavily armed SS officers and men, moving with precision, not retreat. They were an occupation force, sent to crush the last vestiges of resistance in the city center, and they were heading straight for the square. The silent, crying German girl was now standing, frozen, 20 meters from the very spot where the elite, murderous column of the Third Reich was about to deploy. The Watcher's dilemma had just become a desperate, irreversible trap. Miller had 5 seconds to decide how to go from protecting a life to protecting a massive, critical secret, his own presence. The geometry of silence had just been shattered by the geometry of overwhelming force. The clock was ticking, not in minutes, but in the sickening compression of a few desperate seconds. Sergeant Miller, perched in the cathedral's skeletal remains, was experiencing a sniper's nightmare. Not a difficult shot, but a scenario of overwhelming, unacceptable risk. Below him, the silent German girl, mesmerized or paralyzed by the war's violence, stood directly in the deployment zone of the Waffen-SS. The lead vehicle, a heavy command car, slammed its brakes, screeching to a halt precisely by the bombed-out fountain where the girl stood. She was close enough to touch the iron cross painted on its hood. The rear doors of the trucks dropped, and the square immediately flooded with men in black and field-gray uniforms, their movements disciplined, swift, and brutal. These were not the broken, exhausted Wehrmacht soldiers Miller had been targeting. These were the ideological fanatics, the iron core of the regime, infused with a chilling, cold-blooded efficiency. Miller counted 50 of them, minimum, deploying in practiced formation, a lethal tide engulfing his entire sector. The situation was irrevocably changed. His primary objective, maintaining his secret lethal presence, was now in direct conflict with his impulsive human objective, protecting the girl. To fire on the SS now would be suicidal. The sound of the M1903A4's report would instantly be triangulated by 50 trained eyes, and Miller's position, however well concealed, would be saturated with suppressive fire and demolished by anti-tank weaponry. What they, the SS Obersturmführer barking orders at the front, did not know was that they had cornered the very thing they were sent to reinforce, a critical strong point of resistance. What Miller knew, with a gut-deep certainty, was that he could not allow them to consolidate their position, for this sector was the key to the entire American push into Aachen. The irony was devastating. His compassion for one life had led him to jeopardize thousands. Miller trained his scope on the SS commander, a tall, severe man whose face was a mask of aristocratic contempt. A clear shot, one pull of the trigger, and the immediate threat was decapitated. But the consequences? The SS would immediately scatter. The command car would explode, drawing all attention to the shattered spire above. The girl would be caught in the crossfire, or worse, executed as a witness, an act of brutal indifference for which the SS was infamous. Miller did the unthinkable. He held his fire. He watched the SS deploy, his rifle muzzle resting silently on the stone ledge, the tension in his muscles unbearable. He had to become the ghost again, not the executioner. The commander, oblivious to the eyes of Deadeye Miller, began to set up a field command post near the bakery ruins. A young officer spotted the girl. He roughly grabbed her arm, intending to move her away from the tactical zone. The girl did not scream. She merely looked up at the officer with those empty, silent eyes. And here, the first twist of the knife. The officer stopped. He hesitated. He looked at her bundle, a cloth-wrapped collection of something precious. Then, instead of shoving her aside, he exchanged a sharp word with the commander. The SS commander, surprisingly, stopped his activity, walked over, and looked down at the child. Miller, through his powerful 8X scope, saw the unthinkable. The SS Obersturmführer, a man whose hands were certainly stained with the atrocities of the Eastern Front, knelt down. He said something low and quiet to the girl. She did not respond, only shaking her head slowly, holding the bundle tighter. The commander rose, his face expressionless. He gave a sharp command in German. Immediately, 2 SS corporals were detailed, not to remove the girl, but to stand guard, creating a perimeter around her. The silent, crying child was now under the protection of the SS. This was utterly contradictory to everything Miller knew about the fanatical nature of the Schutzstaffel. Why was a high-value command unit, moving into a contested city center, diverting 2 soldiers to guard a seemingly insignificant civilian child? The military logic was non-existent. The mystery deepened, shifting the focus from a simple rescue to a complex tactical puzzle. Miller had to understand the connection. The stakes were too high to dismiss this as a mere moment of SS sentimentality. The industrial scale of the war, the vast production of tanks, planes, and millions of rounds of ammunition had been built on cold, absolute logic. Yet here, a human anomaly was introduced by the very machine of destruction. He reached for his field notebook, using a tiny, dull pencil stub, and began to log every detail. The commander's rank insignia, the unit markings, a faint stylized D on the command car, suggesting the Das Reich Division, men known for exceptional savagery, and the minute interactions with the girl. The silence was now a heavy, oppressive thing. The SS were everywhere. Their presence was a tactical curtain, blinding the American advance and effectively turning Miller's perch into a high-security prison. He was trapped. He could not move. He could not fire. And he could not communicate without risking instantaneous detection by the newly established German field radios. Hours passed. The sun began its slow, inevitable descent, casting long, dramatic shadows that played tricks on the eye, a sniper's enemy. The girl remained by the fountain, the two SS guards positioned like motionless gargoyles. Then the second strange detail emerged. One of the SS guards, momentarily believing himself unobserved, leaned his rifle against the fountain's rim and took a small silver flask from his tunic. He uncorked it, not to drink, but to pour a small amount onto a clean cloth. He approached the girl, knelt down, and began to gently clean the dust and grime from her face. It was an act of shocking tenderness, incongruous with the chilling reputation of the SS. This was not a simple rescue. This was a deliberate, protected operation of unknown purpose. The girl was the center of an invisible circle of importance. Suddenly, the commander, who had been speaking intensely into a field phone, looked directly at the Rathaus spire, not at Miller's exact position, but in the general direction. It was a momentary, unsettling flicker of intuition. Miller froze, his breath held, his finger hovering near the safety catch. He knew the SS were masters of counterintelligence and security. They knew the Americans had snipers. The commander then pointed across the square, towards a set of subterranean tunnels, the city's ancient sewer system, still partially intact. He gave a series of rapid, complex hand signals. The implication was clear. The SS were not just setting up a command post. They were preparing to use the tunnels, likely for a concealed withdrawal or to move a valuable asset. The girl, the bundle. The final piece of this act's escalating suspense clicked into place. Miller was not watching a tactical move. He was watching an extraction. And if the SS planned to move her through the tunnels, Miller would lose sight of her entirely, and with her, the key to the mystery and his unexpected mission. He had to get closer, and he had to do it before darkness fell, and the SS started their subterranean maneuver. Miller made his decision. He would use his technical knowledge of the Rathaus structure, the same structure that gave him his lethal advantage, to descend. He had an hour before total darkness, and he would have to traverse 400 meters of rubble-strewn SS-patrolled terrain to intercept the target. He had to transition from the watcher to the hunter, knowing that he was trading the safety of distance for the desperate intimacy of close-quarters combat. The irony was acute. The man trained for absolute discretion was about to walk directly into the jaws of the most ruthless enemy division on the Western Front, all for a silent, weeping child whose importance was a complete yet compelling mystery. Miller didn't simply climb down. He executed a tactical descent, treating the broken Rathaus as a vertical obstacle course. His first challenge was weight. The M1903A4, coupled with his spotter's scope, extra ammunition, and survival gear, was close to 35 pounds, a lethal burden for silent movement. He discarded everything non-essential: the heavy spotter's scope, 3 pounds of rations, and most dangerously, his reserve ammunition, keeping only 2 stripper clips. He was now committed, relying solely on his primary weapon and the 8 rounds it contained. The old stone structure was brittle, a monument to acoustic betrayal. Every shift of weight, every scuff of his boot against pulverized masonry was magnified in the heavy, silent air. He used the internal damage from a previous bombing run, the jagged, open wounds in the walls, as his route, moving parallel to the main staircase, which was too exposed and too prone to collapse. Miller's technical expertise was not just in ballistics, it was in structural failure and silence. He moved like an elongated shadow, his camouflage wool blending seamlessly with the shadows and the soot stains. It took him a grueling 45 minutes to descend 6 stories, a journey that should have taken 3 minutes in a functioning building. He emerged not onto the street, but into the subterranean dampness of the Rathause's ancient wine cellar, a maze of dark stone vaults and oppressive silence. He was now 2 blocks from the SS command post, separated by a desolate field of rubble, the field of ghosts, as the frontline infantry called it, where every ruin concealed a booby trap, a desperate defender, or the remnants of a life. Before Miller set foot into the open, he took a moment to analyze the enemy's acoustic signature. The SS were not noisy. Their orders were clipped, their movements coordinated. But Miller, utilizing the training that distinguished a sniper from a common marksman, tuned into the absence of noise. He listened for the rhythm, the pauses between conversations, the metallic clinking of equipment checks, the subtle, rhythmic thump of a sentry pacing. He calculated the rotation of the 2 SS guards around the girl. Every 15 minutes, they met at the edge of the fountain, exchanged a quick, low word, and reversed their patrol. This provided a small, critical window of overlap, perhaps 20 seconds, where their backs were turned to his most likely path of approach. His route, 300 meters, traversing the remains of a shoe store, crossing an exposed alley, and finally, using the sewer access cover hidden behind the rubble of the former bakery. He began his traverse, running low, using the principle of visual distortion that snipers mastered. Never move in a straight line, never move at a uniform speed. He looked like debris blown by the wind. The silence of the girl and the unexpected quiet of the SS guards became Miller's cover. He reached the shoe store wreckage. Inside, the floor was covered in splintered wood and broken glass, a sound trap. Miller took off his boots, padding the soles of his socks with thick strips of captured German cloth he kept in his kit. He moved on the balls of his feet, his weight distributed perfectly. The stench of burned leather and stale plaster was overwhelming. As he reached the alley, the setting sun cast a single, brilliant orange shaft of light, illuminating the ground exactly where he needed to cross. A perfect visual exposure. Miller cursed silently. He had to wait for the final minutes of dusk, when the light was at its most ambiguous, the blue hour, before attempting the final fatal crossing. While waiting, he overheard a snatch of German conversation from a block away. 2 SS officers speaking about the command post. The general is insistent. The package must be moved before midnight. The Americans will be here by morning. And the girl? Why the security detail? Is she special? A sharp, dismissive reply. She is the key. She is the final thread. Do not question the general's orders. We secure the legacy, not the child. The term legacy hung in the air, a profound clue. This wasn't about a person. It was about something the girl held, or something she represented. The silent, crying German girl was a living MacGuffin, a key to a strategic or historical secret deemed worthy of protection by a ruthless SS general. The stakes rose again. Miller was no longer saving a child. He was about to intercept a highly classified German asset. The blue hour arrived. Miller made his dash across the alley, a sprint of 3 seconds, a lifetime of tension. He reached the bakery ruins, finding the sewer access cover partially concealed by an overturned cart. It was heavy, cast iron, and sealed with rusted bolts. To open it would create a catastrophic noise. He needed a distraction. The overlap window for the SS guards was coming up. He reached into his kit and pulled out his last remaining technical tool, a German egg hand grenade, captured days earlier. It was designed for a delayed fuse. Miller calculated the fuse delay, 4.5 seconds, and the 15-second rotation window. He pulled the pin, activated the fuse, and gently rolled the grenade, not toward the SS, but into a hollowed-out oil drum 50 meters down the street, far from the girl and far from the SS command post. The oil drum would magnify the sound, creating an acoustic diversion that seemed to come from a different street. 4, 3, 2. The grenade exploded with a muffled, but sharp, thud clatter. Immediately, the SS commander and his men snapped their heads towards the sound, their attention diverted for the critical moments Miller needed. The two guards at the fountain turned their backs to the bakery. Miller used the diversion. He braced his feet, used the raw power in his legs, and with a silent grunt of effort, heaved the heavy sewer lid, scraping iron against concrete. The sound was unavoidable, a raw grind that cut through the silence, but it was swallowed by the SS's focus on the distant grenade. He dropped down the dark, fetid hole, pulling the heavy cover almost shut behind him, leaving a crack just wide enough to see the girl and the fountain. He was enveloped in the warm, bacterial air of the sewer system, a network of tunnels that was now his final desperate path. Through the crack, he saw the SS commander pointing emphatically toward the sewer cover near the fountain. The tunnel system was their exit. They were coming down. The girl, still silent, was being led by the same SS corporal who had cleaned her face toward the final descent. Miller was ahead of them, but not by much. He was now in the enemy's escape route, poised for a subterranean confrontation, a silent stalker in the river of human waste, determined to uncover the dangerous legacy the SS valued more than life itself. The environment of the sewer was a study in sensory overload, a profound choking stench of human waste, decay, and stagnant water, coupled with an absolute lightless darkness that swallowed sound. Miller's technical advantage was severely diminished here. His specialized rifle, designed for extreme range and precision, was now a cumbersome, long weapon, useless in a close-quarters fight. He turned on the minimum setting of his small, waterproof field torch, a weak, red beam that barely cut through the oppressive gloom. He was walking in ankle-deep, icy water, the sound of his boots echoing unnervingly in the stone-lined passage. Miller's immediate priority was to find the tunnel they would use. The Aachen sewer system was an ancient, complex network. He needed to be in the right place to ambush the SS detachment and secure the girl before they reached the main collection chamber, which likely had multiple escape routes to the city's outskirts. He relied on his map training, visualizing the city above. He knew the main sewer line ran parallel to the main boulevard. The fountain entrance would join this main line. He pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that the SS, unencumbered and likely knowing the layout, would be moving fast. As he rounded a sharp bend, his light fell upon a small metallic glint in the water. He stopped, holding his breath, listening for the approaching SS. Nothing. He knelt and retrieved the object. It was a dog tag, but not a standard German Erkennungsmark. It was thicker, made of what looked like tarnished silver, and engraved not with a unit number, but with a single, complex symbol, an entwined serpent and sword. Beneath the inscription, Project Chimère. The SS, the fanatic guard, the silent girl, the legacy, and now this, Project Chimère. The mystery shifted from a simple human rescue to a critical piece of wartime intelligence. Miller, the sniper, was now inadvertently in possession of a potential key to a German secret project, perhaps a technological weapon, a secret formula, or a hidden archive. The industrial scale of the Nazi war machine was always looking for the miracle weapon, the Wunderwaffe, and this tag hinted at exactly that desperate, high-stakes development. Miller pocketed the tag. He understood the tactical necessity of this find. If the girl was the key, and the SS was the muscle, then Project Chimère was the ultimate prize. He reached the main sewer line. It was a vast, arching tunnel, 10 feet high, with a concrete walkway above the main flow. He flattened himself against the cold, slimy wall, extinguishing his red light. The only light source now was the faintest glow of the moonlight filtering through an occasional maintenance grate far above. He heard them. Not footsteps, but the metallic sound of a heavy boot scraping concrete. Then, the rhythmic dripping of water being shaken off fabric. They were on the walkway, moving fast. He could smell them now. The distinct, sterile scent of leather polished with specialized oil, cutting through the sewage odor. The SS uniform. The SS detachment was moving with silent, terrifying discipline. The lead man carried a powerful, shielded lantern, casting long, dancing shadows that worked against Miller. He counted 7 men, led by the Obersturmführer, with the girl in the center, flanked by the same corporal. She was still clutching her bundle, moving mechanically. Miller realized he had 2 choices: A frontal, suicidal ambush that might save the girl but sacrifice the intelligence, or a quiet, stealthy tale that would allow him to learn the final destination of Project Chimère. The strategic mind won over the emotional impulse. He let them pass. As they moved, he heard a scrap of whispered conversation between the commander and his second-in-command, magnified by the acoustic channel of the tunnel. The Americans do not suspect the payload. She is the carrier. Her memory is the circuit. Her memory is the circuit. This single phrase was the third, most profound twist. The girl wasn't carrying a document or a physical object. The legacy, the Project Chimère, was somehow encoded within her own mind. Or perhaps the bundle was not a physical weapon, but a memento that unlocked a secret within her. The SS were not protecting an object. They were protecting a vessel. This explained the SS's unusual calculated care. They couldn't simply brutalize the secret out of her. They needed her intact and, perhaps, emotionally stable enough to cooperate. Miller began his silent stalk, keeping a terrifyingly close distance, no more than 20 meters, using the deep shadows cast by the walkway's arches as his cover. His long rifle was now a hindrance, forcing him to move sideways to avoid snagging it on the tunnel walls. He held his breath for long, agonizing intervals, praying the SS unit did not decide to secure their rear flank. The group suddenly stopped. The commander raised his hand. Absolute silence descended again. "She needs to rest," the commander stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet still conveying a chilling authority. He instructed the corporal to administer something. The corporal opened a small field pack and pulled out a syringe. The girl, who had remained silent through the bombing, the shelling, and the sheer terror of the SS deployment, finally reacted. A silent, desperate shudder ran through her small body. She knew what this was. Miller's blood ran cold. Was this a drug to force the memory? A sedative? He couldn't risk them tampering with the circuit. The time for observation was over. The SS were actively endangering the prize, and Miller had to act. He had one shot at this. His M1 1903A4 was a bolt-action rifle, meaning he would get one chance, and then the chaos of reloading. He had to take out the leader and the corporal with the syringe simultaneously, two targets, separated by a crucial meter, in low light. An impossible shot for most, but Miller was dead-eye. He racked the bolt, the quiet metallic clack of the action sounding deafening in the sewer. The SS men were still focused on the girl. Miller sighted in on the commander's head, the primary target, the source of the mission. The commander, however, suddenly shifted, leaning down to speak to the girl. In that millisecond, the corporal, holding the syringe, became the primary threat. Miller shifted his aim, targeting the corporal's chest. But just as he prepared to squeeze the trigger, the girl looked up, not at the corporal, but directly down the tunnel, into the absolute blackness where Miller was hidden. Her silent, empty eyes fixed on the exact shadow of his position, as if she could see the cold steel of the rifle barrel. And then she did the final, shocking thing that shattered Miller's tactical focus. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent, desperate warning. "No, don't." The SS corporal, distracted by the girl's sudden movement, looked up, searching the darkness. Miller's opportunity vanished. He was compromised. He had been seen, not by a trained SS fanatic, but by the silent, crying German girl he had risked everything to save. He had to escape or fire. And in this impossible situation, the man who lived by the single perfect shot realized the most strategically important action was to become completely invisible once more. The moment of recognition, the subtle negative nod from the silent girl, created an immediate, paradoxical tension. Miller, the hunter, was now the hunted, his position momentarily revealed by the very person he was protecting. The SS corporal did not see Miller, but he saw the girl's fixed gaze into the darkness. Instinctively, the corporal raised his submachine gun, sweeping the beam of the lantern over the tunnel wall just behind Miller's position. The light was blinding, but Miller was already moving, retracting himself into a small, dry maintenance alcove carved into the stone. The commander, sensing the break in discipline, barked a sharp, frustrated order. "What is it, Corporal?" She She looked into the tunnel, Herr Obersturmführer, as if someone were there. The commander scoffed, but the moment of doubt was planted. Nonsense. The Americans are above, not below. Continue the preparation. The SS command was still operating under a critical assumption, the belief that the tunnel system was secure. But Miller knew this was a ticking clock. He had made a noise, however small, and exposed the potential for a rear threat. They would sweep the tunnel eventually. Miller, now deep within the alcove, realized the true nature of the trap. He had not walked into a simple ambush. He had walked into a strategic choke point. The SS knew the Americans were closing in on Aachen. They had secured the girl, the key to Project Chimera, and were using the one unmonitored route, the sewer system, to move her out to a secure base. His rifle was now pressed against the cold stone, his breathing ragged but controlled. He pulled out the silver dog tag again, his red light illuminating the strange symbol. He needed to understand the legacy. Was it military? Political? Cultural? The Das Reich division was often used for special assignments involving loot or secret archives. He could not tail them anymore. He had to get ahead. The next major intersection, according to his mental map, was 70 meters down the tunnel. A massive intersection known as the Bishop's Knot. If he could get there, he could lay a tactical trap that neutralized the SS without harming the girl. He slipped out of the alcove and began to move, running low on the walkway, using the curvature of the tunnel walls to keep himself invisible. He was moving at twice the speed of the SS, accepting the increased risk of noise. Meanwhile, the SS commander, disturbed by the girl's reaction, gave a new, chilling order. "Lieutenant, take 3 men, sweep the rear tunnels, silence any intrusion. We cannot risk the payload." Miller was 50 meters away when he heard the faint sound of footsteps turning back. The SS counter-sweep had begun. He was now racing against time and against 4 highly trained SS officers intent on his silent elimination. He reached the Bishop's Knot. It was a chaotic junction where 3 massive tunnels merged, the acoustic echo deafening. This was his advantage. The SS team would have to pause here to decide on the exit route. He found his spot. A high, dark recess above the walkway, an abandoned maintenance area 8 feet above the path. He scaled the wet, slimy wall, scrambling in the darkness, reaching the safety of the recess just as the 4-man SS sweep team rounded the bend. Miller was above them, clinging to the shadows like a bat. He watched, unable to move or fire, as the team searched the tunnel with cold, methodical professionalism. They used their lights, scanning the ground, the water, and the walls. One light beam passed directly below Miller's position, momentarily illuminating the worn leather of his boot heel. He froze, his body locked in a spasm of control, knowing that a single twitch, a single drop of sweat, would be his final mistake. The SS team found nothing, and concluding the noise must have been an animal or water runoff, they moved on, heading back toward the main group. Miller had survived by pure, agonizing stillness. He now had a brief window before the main SS group arrived. He had to prepare his trap at the knot. His weapon was unsuitable for a close-range fight against 4 automatic weapons. He had to improvise. He reached into his kit and pulled out the single, desperate countermeasure he had saved. The last 2 field flares designed for signaling Allied aircraft. Miller knew the power of sensory overload. A flare, in the confined, pitch-black space of the sewer, would be instantaneously blinding, deafening, and disorienting. He affixed both flares to the underside of the walkway using his medical tape. He positioned them to fire directly into the path of the main SS group. As he finished, he heard the approaching sound of the commander's group. They were only 30 meters away, the light of their main lantern dancing on the water. They arrived at the knot, and the commander stopped. He pulled out a worn map of the city's underground network, consulting it with the focused intensity of a man carrying the fate of a secret project. "The North Chamber," the commander whispered. "It leads to the railway substation. From there, we have a clear path to the motorcade." The North Chamber, the destination of Project Chimera, was revealed. The commander then turned to the girl, his voice softening again in that terrifyingly paternal way. "Almost there, little one. Tell me again about the numbers in the picture. Tell me about the altitude." The girl remained silent, but her body shook violently. The commander was not just moving her. He was actively interrogating the circuit, trying to extract the information as they traveled. Miller realized the brutal mechanism of the plot. Project Chimera was a piece of technical data, coordinates, schematics, or an encryption key, hidden in a memory trigger, possibly a child's toy or a drawing, that only the girl could reliably access under stress. The SS needed the specific memory, perhaps relating to a hidden Nazi bunker or a final launch location. Miller knew he had to act now. He pulled the ripcord on the two flares. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. A blinding, white-hot magnesium explosion of light and a deafening crack instantly filled the tunnel. The SS commander and his men cried out, momentarily paralyzed by the sensory shock. Their shadows were violently, chaotically thrown across the curved tunnel walls. The air was filled with the acrid, burning smell of the flare's chemical combustion. Miller dropped from his position, landing silently on the concrete walkway behind the blinded SS unit. The girl, shielded slightly by the corporal's body, instinctively covered her face. He had one chance to secure the girl and the information. He raised his heavy Springfield rifle, not to fire, but using the dense, heavy wood and steel as a blunt, silent instrument of war. He targeted the first man, the corporal who had cared for the girl. Miller slammed the rifle butt into the corporal's temple with a swift, brutal force. The man crumpled instantly, a heavy splash following as his body hit the dark water. He immediately turned to the commander, who was still rubbing his eyes, trying to comprehend the blinding light. The commander was armed with a Luger pistol, but his vision was gone. Miller used the element of surprise and the technical failure of the enemy's senses. He was the ghost made real. He moved to secure the key to the entire operation. The commander, still blinded, began to panic, fumbling for his pistol. Miller knew he couldn't afford a shot. He slammed the barrel of his rifle hard into the commander's wrist. The commander screamed, the sound muffled by the still-burning flares, and the Luger clattered onto the walkway. Miller's training took over. He grabbed the girl by the arm, pulling her away from the chaos. She offered no resistance, her body limp with shock, but she still clutched the bundle tightly. "Keep silent," Miller whispered urgently in English, knowing she likely wouldn't understand, but using the tone of absolute command. The other SS officers were regaining their sight, their shouts echoing in the tunnel. Miller had minutes, perhaps seconds, before the entire sweep team returned and the situation turned into a slaughterhouse. He dragged the girl into the tunnel leading to the north chamber, the path the SS had intended to take. As they ran, the girl finally broke her silence. Not a scream, but a low, choked whisper in perfect, unaccented English. "The altitude is 9,000 meters. The speed is 550 kilometers per hour. The target is the Führer bunker." Miller stopped dead, pulling her behind a large stone pillar. The sheer weight of this confession was staggering. The legacy, Project Chimera, was not an object or a map, but the launch parameters for a critical weapon or a strike plan. And the target was Hitler's own command center. This was not a plan to save the Reich. It was a coup, or a highly sophisticated act of internal sabotage carried out by a powerful faction within the Nazi hierarchy. The SS were not protecting a secret. They were protecting a counter-secret. The irony was absolute. The American sniper was now protecting the key to a German plot designed to eliminate Hitler. "What is the weapon?" Miller asked, his voice low, his heart pounding against his ribs. She held up the small, cloth-wrapped bundle. It wasn't a toy. It was a tarnished, slightly bent, framed photograph. In the picture, a man in a Wehrmacht uniform smiled, a high-ranking officer, judging by the insignia, standing next to the girl, and a beautifully detailed model of a sleek twin-engine aircraft. "My father," she whispered. "He was the engineer. Flügel des Todes, wings of death. He put the launch data in the picture, in the pixels." Miller understood the technical brilliance and the profound security of the plan. The launch data, the altitude, speed, and final coordinates, was encoded in the grayscale levels of the photograph's original printing, a simple, visually undetectable cipher that only a brilliant engineer would conceive. The girl was the emotional key that unlocked the memory of the code. Project Chimera was a highly advanced jet bomber, capable of carrying a massive payload, designed by a disillusioned faction of the German military to perform a final devastating act of internal rebellion. The 9,000 meters, the girl continued, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. It is the altitude for the thermal shield's failure. They, the SS, they want to change the target. Not the bunker, they want to fly it to London instead. The SS commander and his faction had intercepted the plot. They were extracting the girl not to use the Wunderwaffe against the Allied forces in a planned, predictable way, but to change its parameters and use its devastating power for their own, more extreme, genocidal purpose, the final, crushing blow to the British will. The SS were seizing the coup weapon for their own agenda. Miller, the lone sniper, was now the only obstacle standing between the SS and a catastrophic, world-altering event. He checked his rifle. 5 rounds remaining. He was in a subterranean labyrinth, surrounded by elite SS troops who would be returning at any moment. He looked at the girl. Her face was no longer blank, but etched with intelligence and a terror that transcended the combat around them. "We have to stop them from reaching the North Chamber," Miller stated, switching from rescuer to strategic operative. "They will be back," she said, her eyes fixed on the entrance. "The men who went back, they will be here first. My father taught me about escape routes. There is a smaller maintenance pipe near the wall, but it is very tight." Miller grabbed the girl's hand, looking into the darkness of the pipe. He knew his chance of survival was close to zero, but the fate of London, the legacy of Project Chimera, and the conscience of the war depended on him. Suddenly, a shot rang out, a sharp, high-velocity crack from the entrance tunnel. It was the SS sweep team. They had returned, and they were not using suppressive fire. They were shooting to kill. The bullet ricocheted off the stone arch directly above Miller's head, sending a shower of concrete fragments raining down. Miller shoved the girl toward the small, tight pipe. "Go! Go now! I will cover you!" The girl, however, did not move. She looked at Miller, not with fear, but with a deep, unsettling suspicion. Her silent facade was shattered, revealing a sharp, calculating mind beneath the fear. "I need the dog tag," she said, her voice a sudden, shocking betrayal. "The silver tag. My father made it. It's the key to the frequency. Give it to me, or I will scream and tell them you are here." Miller's world dissolved into the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening realization of the ultimate irony. The girl was not a passive victim, but an active participant. Her silence was a defense, her tears a weapon, and the dog tag was not a simple clue. It was the final, most critical piece of the Chimera puzzle. She was holding the key to a weapon of mass destruction, and she was now holding it hostage. He had saved her life, exposed his position, and revealed the secret plot, only to be confronted by the ultimate double cross. The silent German girl he rescued was now demanding the final piece of the cipher, potentially for her own unknown purpose. The ultimatum hung heavy in the smoke-filled air of the sewer tunnel. The SS were closing in from one direction, and the girl, the key to the entire operation, was blocking his escape and demanding the final piece of the puzzle. Miller knew the tactical necessity of survival, but the immediate threat was the weapon itself. He had to assume the girl's intentions, regardless of her father's coup plot, were now aligned with securing the highly destructive Chimera data. "Why do you need the frequency?" Miller demanded, keeping his voice a low, gravelly whisper, though the SS gunfire was growing louder. "It is not a launch frequency," she replied, her eyes hard. "It is the scramble frequency. My father built a kill switch. The dog tag activates the jammer. Without it, Chimera flies to the coordinates. With it, the flight system fails." The final layer of the plot was revealed. The engineer had built a failsafe, a hidden counter-protocol. The SS were not just changing the target. They were racing to find the jammer to ensure their catastrophic plan succeeded. The girl, the daughter of the conspirator, was trying to complete her father's counter-mission. Her survival was secondary to the destruction of the weapon. Miller was forced to make the ultimate choice: trust the word of a betrayed German child, or risk the loss of London. He knew the SS would show her no mercy once they had the information. "The dog tag is in my pocket. You have to go. They will kill you to get it," Miller said, backing up toward the pipe entrance, drawing fire from the SS sweep team. He pulled the silver tag out and tossed it onto the wet ground between them. The girl scrambled for it, snatching it up and securing it inside the photograph bundle. "Now go!" Miller yelled, shoving her toward the maintenance pipe. As she entered the pipe, crawling into the blackness, the commander's voice rang out from the main tunnel. "He has the girl!" "Do not fire on the girl! Preserve the payload!" The SS commander, having recovered from the flares, was back in command, prioritizing the secret over Miller's elimination. This technical restriction, the order not to fire on the girl, was Miller's final tactical advantage. Miller turned, his back to the pipe entrance, his rifle finally raised to fire. He was using himself as a human shield to buy the girl the precious seconds she needed to escape. He saw them, the commander and the remaining 5 SS men advancing with professional menace, their rifles raised. They were avoiding the water, moving on the walkway, their uniforms smelling of gun oil and cold hate. Miller braced the Springfield against his shoulder, finding a sense of terrible calm. He was back in his element, the geometry of death. But this time the range was short. The targets were moving, and he had only 4 rounds left. He took his first shot, aiming for the commander's shoulder, a non-fatal but debilitating shot, intending to eliminate the leader without wasting a round. The bullet hit with a sickening thud. The commander stumbled, clutching his shoulder, his scream echoing off the damp stone. 1 round spent. The SS immediately returned fire, a hail of automatic weapon fire that tore into the stone pillar Miller was hiding behind. The noise was deafening, the air filling with pulverized stone and cordite. Miller popped out and took his second shot, aiming for the leg of the man carrying the radio, eliminating communication. The shot was precise. The radio operator collapsed into the water, the field radio short-circuiting with a final high-pitched electrical whine. 2 rounds spent. The remaining 4 SS men reacted with training. 2 laid down suppressive fire, while the other 2, using the cover of the tunnel arch, began to flank Miller's position. Miller had to move. He threw himself into a flanking pipe opposite the girl's escape, giving him a temporary vantage point. He saw the first flanking SS man, a corporal, move into the open. Miller squeezed the trigger. The 3rd round hit the corporal in the chest. 3 rounds spent. The final 2 SS men paused, realizing they were fighting an unseen, surgically accurate opponent in the darkness. The myth of the American sniper was turning into a deadly reality. Miller had 1 round left in his clip. He couldn't risk reloading. He had to wait for the final, critical moment. He heard the commander's voice, now weak and filled with rage. "Forget the rear. Secure the exit. She cannot reach the railway." The 2 remaining SS men, along with the wounded commander, began to move past Miller's pipe, prioritizing the north chamber exit over his elimination. They were running out of time. They knew the girl had the final piece of the puzzle. Miller sighted his last round on the commander's good leg. He needed to cripple the leader, ensuring the last men would be too slow to catch the girl. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its mark. The commander went down with a final choked cry, his gun skidding across the walkway. Click. The chamber was empty. Miller was unarmed. He heard the girl's voice, faint but clear, echoing from the pipe she had entered. "I'm through. I'm moving toward the power station." The legacy was being transferred. Miller had succeeded. He scrambled backward into the darkness of his pipe, pulling his heavy, empty rifle with him. He heard the frantic shouts of the last 2 SS officers, now focused entirely on the north chamber, rushing past his position. They had failed to eliminate the American sniper, and in their haste, they had abandoned the tunnel. Miller lay in the dark, his body shaking, realizing he had survived. The immediate threat was gone. But the final, most dangerous part of the mission was now on the shoulders of an 8-year-old girl. To use the final cipher, the dog tag, to dismantle Project Chimère before the final SS objective, the railway substation, was reached. The true end of the story was not in the bullet, but in the memory and the conscience of a child. The silence returned to the sewer, but it was a different silence now. Not the geometry of hunting, but the exhausted quiet of a mission accomplished against impossible odds. Sergeant Frank Deadeye Miller emerged from the pipe, his uniform soaked, his body aching. the empty M19903A4, a redundant weight in his hands. He looked at the wreckage, the burning flares slowly fading, the 3 SS bodies, and the commander, left alive, but wounded and neutralized. Miller took the Luger, now a prize of war, and placed it in his tunic. His immediate objective was clear: report the details of Project Chimère, the weapon, the target, and the jammer frequency, to Allied intelligence. The fate of London, and the ultimate end of the Flugel des Todes bomber, now rested on the speed of his radio transmission. He found his way out of the sewer system through an access point 2 blocks from the SS initial deployment. The city above was now utterly dark, save for the intermittent bursts of American artillery, a constant reminder of the war's industrial, impersonal brutality that contrasted sharply with the intimate, high-stakes moral drama he had just lived through. Miller reached the shattered Rathaus, ascended to a lower, safer floor, and used the field radio he had left with his forward observer, Henderson. He spoke in rapid, coded bursts, using the technical details the girl had revealed. Target coordinates: Führer bunker. Weapon: advanced bomber, twin engine. Counter protocol: scrambler frequency encoded in Project Chimère tag, transferred to source asset for deployment. Within hours, the information was on its way up the chain of command, bypassing every tactical layer to reach the highest Allied authority. The historical irony was complete. An American sniper, meant to kill German infantry, had instead saved a German general's assassination plot against Hitler, thus averting a catastrophic SS attack on Britain. The official records of the Aachen campaign never mentioned Project Chimère. There was no mention of a lone American sniper engaging an elite SS detachment in the sewers. The incident was classified under the highest level of wartime secrecy, Operation Black Tide Neutralized, a vague entry referring to the destruction of a significant German resistance point. The Allied command, unwilling to admit that the war's end had almost been decided by an internal German power struggle, buried the details. But the legacy of the silent crying German girl, the true key, lived on. Months later, following the war's end, Miller received a single, unmarked envelope delivered by a military intelligence courier. Inside was a small, crudely drawn pencil sketch on thin, aged paper. It depicted a twin-engine plane, trailing smoke, plummeting toward the earth, with a small stick figure running away from the wreckage. Across the bottom, written in German and English, were the words, "The altitude was correct. The sky was clear. Thank you, Deadeye." The Flugel des Todes never reached London. The 9,000 meters was the altitude that triggered the thermal shield failure, but the silver dog tag, the scrambler frequency, was the final command. The silent girl, the daughter of the conspirator, had done her part. She had found a radio frequency at the power station, used the dog tag to broadcast the scramble code, and ensured the destruction of her father's creation, saving not just the Allies, but the moral center of the war itself. Miller never sought to know her fate. He understood the profound, brutal logic of the conflict. Some heroes are best left as ghosts, their actions unrecorded, their peace ensured by the absence of their name in the historical ledger. The story of Sergeant Frank Miller became a quiet legend in the Sniper Corps, a man who once risked his mission for a silent child and ended up dismantling a geopolitical time bomb. It was a story not of technological superiority nor industrial scale, but of the unpredictable, redemptive power of the human conscience in the face of absolute war. The single shot he didn't take was ultimately his most important. The final fate of Project Chimère lay not in steel and cordite, but in the integrity of a secret silent pact made in the cold, wet darkness of a sewer tunnel in a city that had forgotten how to weep. This is the true legacy of Aachen, a silent, powerful footnote in the greatest conflict in human history. If you found this dramatic exploration of history, technology, and human experience compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell. Your support ensures we can continue to uncover the most intricate and high-stakes stories of the Second World War.